Hi there.
Hi, thank you, Eleanor, for having me.
Thank
Hi,
you so
everybody.
much for being here. We really appreciate it. I mentioned kind of a quick rundown of your experience. You've had a very impressive career, and I want to start from the beginning, right? You
Okay.
started your job as a journalist. You spent 20 years at Time Magazine.
Yes.
Talk to me about how you think about traditional media. Does traditional legacy media still matter?
Well, okay, I'll get to that. Does it matter? Imagine this. I was a correspondent for Time Magazine. It was still a weekly. We came out weekly. I'm based in Moscow. Tanks are rolling down the streets. There's been a coup. Gorbachev's been arrested. And blessedly, it was a Monday. So we had 5 days to work on the stories and cover what would eventually be the collapse of the Soviet Union. And it was a perfect magazine story, weekly magazine story, because by Friday, Gorbachev had been released, the coup plotters had been arrested, and everything was tied up in a bow, more or less. Now, another story about those years is that I met Vladimir Putin for the first time in 1992. I met him a number of times later as a reporter covering George W. Bush and then working as press secretary for President Obama. So it's been like there's circularity in my career, but the point is it's like it was such a different time, right? The pace of news was so different. Even the dailies were just dailies, right? And what's so different now is just the volume, the disaggregation, the number of outlets, the ability of a single person to launch a news production entity on Substack or somewhere else. It's an incredible difference.
Yeah, so it's not just how the news is distributed, but also who is distributing it, right? Like
Right.
creators versus traditional journalists versus influencers. So back to that question about traditional media, how do you think about it in your current role leading comms at Airbnb?
Well, in my jobs now, post White House, with Amazon and now Airbnb, we care about traditional media. We have relationships with traditional media, but we spend a lot of time thinking about how we can flood the zone with our narrative, the stories we want to tell about our values as a company, and the hosts we help in communities around the world, help them make a living. And we do that through our own vertical channels, or we do it through influencers or other means, and then we do it through interviews. We're lucky in our CEO, co-founder. I've been very lucky in my life with principals who know how to communicate. Brian Chesky's a great communicator, so we leverage the hell out of him. He gives a lot of interviews, and he's great. He does a lot of podcasts, a lot of new media, and he posts a lot. So we try to take advantage of every outlet available.
To be frank with you, that strategy does kind of sound like the strategy that the White House is taking, right? They're not just relying on a press pool or beat reporters. They're reaching out to non-traditional influencer voices, maybe going more direct. So I do think it's fair to say that the White House's strategy has rippled down through corporate America.
No, I think it's fair to say that president's strategy, their strategy, it's transformed certainly politics, and it is. It is the present and the future, and there's no question that that is their superpower, right? Their ability to just constantly bombard the world with content,
Yep.
and everybody can debate about its levels of accuracy and some of the motivations behind it, but it's effective in terms of what their goals are. I think we still, and I think a lot of companies and other entities are, careful about the outlets they use. They tend not to, they tend to be discriminating, but it is important to reach everybody. Back when I was in the White House working for President Obama, and we were trying to reach people who weren't following traditional news. We needed people to sign up for Obamacare. We needed young people, and they weren't reading traditional newspapers. They weren't watching the evening news. So we did things like an Ask Me Anything.
Right.
With Reddit. We put him on Between Two Ferns with Zach Galifianakis, and people are like, oh, this is undignified, it's outrageous. But I'll tell you what, signups went up, young people saw it, they heard the message, so that taught us a lot.
Yeah. I want to talk about your experience in the White House. You were the longest serving press secretary
of what I like to say the modern era.
Modern
This certainly this century.
Yeah.
So, Marlon Fitzwater did it for 5 years, and President Reagan, President Bush, first President Bush. But yeah, 3.5 years.
Behind the podium.
I think the average, well, now lately, at least in the first Trump administration, it was, I guess, 1 a year. But the average has been about 2 years.
What do you make of the layout, the format of the current White House briefing room?
Look, I think I'll say a couple of things without engaging too deeply in sort of the politics of it. I think it's important to recognize the media landscape has changed, to bring in new voices, to shake things up. I think that's admirable, and I think everybody can learn from that. I do think it matters, like who. It's not a level playing field. Even when I was there, the serious journalists, the ones who were independent, the ones who were after the facts, you knew who they were. And there are people in the briefing room today, which is true back then, but I think there are more now, who aren't. They're advocates. They're not necessarily truth seekers. They're message deliverers. And I think that's a choice they've made, and I guess it's working for them. I think it eventually, in politics and in policy, the substantive material catches up. Like, how's the economy doing? How's inflation? How's unemployment? How are companies doing? How's your 401k? Those things are going to overwhelm any media strategy eventually. If they're doing well, you're going to look like a genius. If they're not, you're going to suffer.
Right. I want to talk about the press pool, AP. I know Airbnb, you all engage a lot on the local level. I would imagine that local media is important for you all.
Local media is very important to us. Local politics, I do policy as well,
right.
And that's, all of our issues tend to be, city, maybe state, but very, almost never federal.
Yeah, well, and the AP is a huge feed for a
Right.
lot of the local outlets. So what do you make of the ban?
It's troubling to me. I guess the hard part for me is I was listening before, like when I was a press secretary and I called on Jake Tapper, who was a White House correspondent from ABC, he was brutal. He was incredibly tough. He asked incredibly hard questions and would challenge me, or maybe or Jonathan Karl or Ed Henry at Fox News or the AP reporters. It's like so the idea that they weren't advocates. They certainly weren't advocates for us. They were doing their jobs. And I think the AP is an incredibly important source of news and provider of news for people around the country and the world. And we need to recognize that. And they are independent.
Who is your favorite reporter to call on from behind the podium?
My favorite?
Yeah.
I don't know that I had a favorite. I mean, I think he's going to hate me saying this because he was tough on me too, but Steve Holland is, one of the finest people in journalism and one of the most decent human beings that I ever met in the press corps. And he was a White House correspondent when I was a White House correspondent. He was a White House correspondent when I was press secretary, and he's a good human being.
After leaving the Obama administration, you went to Amazon, where you kind of earned a reputation for being a Bezos whisperer of sorts. Do you guys still keep in touch?
Jeff and I?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
What's your take on how things are going at the Washington Post, how he's handling that?
Well, I haven't talked to him about that. When I was with him, when I started at Amazon, he had only recently bought the Washington Post. I admired greatly what he did to revitalize the newspaper. I think it's, as was the case then, it is the case now that this is an incredibly challenging environment, and I don't think I know he didn't buy the paper to turn it into a nonprofit or to be a charity, but to find a method to make it a sustainable profit-making institution. And I think that's what he's trying to do. I think it's important, and this is not a value judgment on any of the decisions they've made, but as somebody who was born in D.C., ironically, and so somebody who's read the paper since I started reading newspapers, like, you got to watch the content. You have to see how they're covering the news. And, I think they're still out there covering the news aggressively, and that's what matters.
Another thing he's building is space tourism.
Yeah.
Would you ever go on one of those trips?
you know, you get to a certain age and you realize there are things in your life you probably won't do. That's probably one of them. I also couldn't afford it, but you know, I know he's super excited about it. I remember when he went up for the first time, and I talked to him, and he said it was, you know, one of the best days of his life. It is something he had been thinking about since he was in high school.
I want to focus on the now, right? Your role at Airbnb, leading policy and comms. What are the rules of the road for executives when they're trying to engage in this environment from a comms and policy perspective?
Look, I think any communicator who wants to succeed out there has to be authentic. And I think if you're dictating or you're speaking about things that you know you don't really have a lot of authority over, I think the previous panel talked about, you know, if you sell bagel bites, why are you talking about abortion rights? I mean, I think you have to start from, you know, what you know and what you represent. And for us, it's, you know, we're a tech company, but everything we do is in, you know, IRL, in the real world, right? Our hosts are real people. Our guests are real people. And the whole magic of Airbnb comes together when people travel and are in the real world experiencing the wonder of discovering a new city or a new place or a new country and meeting their hosts. So, you know, we talk about that a lot. We talk about community, about you know, our opportunity, about inclusivity, and the fact that, you know, we are across the world much more alike than we are different.
You mentioned before your CEO, Brian Chesky, is a great communicator. He's known for having a very high EQ. Do employees expect him to speak out on these broader issues given that?
I mean, I think we're like a lot of companies that, you know, where there's, you know, people are engaged, they're incredibly diverse and smart group of people, and they, you know, we have those discussions. We have conversations internally. Brian gets asked about issues regularly when he does all hands meetings, you know, CEO Q&A, which he does regularly, and we handle those, you know, those sort of challenges as they come. But I think engagement, authenticity, honesty about the issues is the best approach, because, you know, if you're lurching around, you know, you believe this week, you believe this next week, that's going to catch up to you too, and you lose your connection with your colleagues, and then eventually with your customers.
Right. Between Jeff Bezos, former President Obama, Brian Chesky, you've advised.
Who do I like best? No.
Yeah, you can answer that question. I was going to say you've advised some very influential leaders. What tips do you have for delivering bad news to these type leaders?
You know, I learned this. And I'm so grateful. I was so grateful for the opportunity. But early on, when I became press secretary, the president and I were talking, just the two of us, and he said to me, "I need you to speak up in these meetings." So this wasn't about my press secretary role. It's like, I count on you to tell me what you think and to offer your advice. And I was like, oh, okay. And I realized that I was so, you know, overwhelmed by the responsibilities I had as a spokesperson that I wasn't being the best, you know, sort of staffer I could be to him. And it was, you know, he was prodding me to be a truth teller. And one of the things that I learned from President Obama too is the worst thing you could do with him was flatter him. Like anybody who said, "Oh, Mr. President, your tie is fantastic today," or "That is just the best idea," he was instantly skeptical of them. And there's some relatively well-known people who, in our administration, who tried that with him and who were just like, he never really was comfortable around that kind of flattery. And, you know, he wanted the truth. He didn't always agree with you, but he wanted you to tell him what you thought.
Yeah. Okay.
I told people at Amazon, I tell people at Airbnb, like, we're not paid to tell the boss that he's a genius.
What they want to hear. Right.
And it's hard to tell, you know, your CEO, your president, your manager that you disagree with them. But if, you know, the way to start is to say, "I have a different view." You don't have to say you're wrong or you're an idiot, or you're, you know, I think Mike was saying up here, you know, that's a dumb idea. You know, obviously you have to be graceful in how you handle it. But hey, I have a different idea. And it's really important to say from the start, is my opinion going to be fact-based? Do I have data to back it up?
Right.
Or is it just like my instinct and my gut? And if you're honest about that up front, you won't get chewed out for offering an opinion that, you know, has no data behind it. And I think that's the approach I've tried to take.
we're going to have to leave it there, but we do like to end on one fun thing.
Yeah.
You are a musician in your free time. You are in a band with some of your friends. Tell us about this.
So I have wanted to be, my future was going to be as a rock star from the time I was a teenager. It's just I wasn't very good. And so I pursued other things. But I've always sort of had fun with it. And for, since the late 90s, I've been in this terrible garage band with Tony Blinken and some other friends who are all here in DC now, a few are elsewhere. We haven't been able to play for a long time because Tony was a little busy, but we talk a lot about playing again. We're aggressively bad. We write our own songs, and they're terrible. But
can we find it on Spotify?
We have you cannot find. There was a lot written about Tony's musicianship, and he's a good guitarist. And there's some stuff that he did when he tried to, go solo on us that he did put on Spotify. But you will not find any of our music anywhere online because we want to, we all want to keep our day jobs.
We've got to catch you live. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
One day.
Well, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for being
Thank you,
here.
Eleanor.
And thank you all for starting your weekend off with us. We really appreciate it. We also want to thank Rock Solutions for making this possible. We have many other events coming up, so we hope to see you again soon. Enjoy, mix and mingle, and thanks again.